Hey, this is Jack Ryan here from the Legal and Liability Risk Management Institute. I want to take a few minutes of your time and talk to you about what we're learning from law enforcement around the country, some of the different ideas on the way that law enforcement should deal with this current state of emergency that the United States is in. And again, just to kind of share, one of the things we often say is that we don't always network the way we should and pass information to each other. So this is our attempt to assist law enforcement with sharing of information. Certainly, you feel free to share information with us at any point in time if you think you have some ideas on things that we should do, and we'll certainly try to share that information as well. Hey, I don't think that this is the first time that law enforcement has faced this type of emergency. In fact, law enforcement is very good at dealing with emergencies. Law enforcement on a regular basis has to deal with emergencies, and this emergency in this particular case is a little bit different from the standpoint of duration, but it's not different in comparison to other things that we have dealt with. And I think there's a frame of reference on which to build an action plan for both the big and the small agency. Anyone that is on the East Coast certainly has dealt with hurricanes, for example. And I will tell you that when there is a hurricane, we limit calls for service. We don't have officers actively or proactively patrolling. In fact, at the height of the storm, we often have officers take what we call fixed positions at fire stations and various safe buildings throughout the city. So that's the kind of thing that we do in that type of natural emergency. But again, this is a little different from the standpoint of duration. Normally hurricanes, we can see an immediate end in sight. We know about how long the height of the storm is going to be and all of that. And then as soon as that part is over, we go out. Why do we do that? Well, we want to keep our officers safe so that they're available to respond once the height of the storm passes. And I think that's something that we should be looking at here. We want to have the availability of officers. We don't want officers quarantined. We don't want officers sick because then we won't be able to take care of the things that need to be taken care of, the most serious things, when those issues happen. So again, one of the things that agencies can consider, in which a lot of agencies have put out general orders. I've been reading general orders submitted to us by agencies over the last few days, and a lot of agencies are really limiting the calls for service that they're going on. So for example, property crimes, thefts that have already taken place, there's nobody on the scene, somebody wants to call and report it, they're taking that over the phone. Dog bites, for example. The dog bite isn't in progress. They're taking that over the phone. Some even alarm bells of the nature where they can call the business owner and say, hey, did you set that off by accident or whatnot? So there's a lot of things that are taking place by phone. In fact, I was in an agency in South Carolina last week before this thing really locked up, and one of the things in their action plan was, because the SROs were not going to be in the schools, they created workstations with distancing in the station, and the SROs were on shift, and they were in the station, and they were taking reports over the phone just as if an officer had responded out to the scene. Things of that nature. Even car accidents under where nobody's hurt, it's under a certain value amount. Even in those cases, a lot of agencies are doing that by phone. So again, the idea is to limit contacts by officers by design, and that's certainly something that law enforcement is doing. That's something that law enforcement is considering. The other thing is proactive policing. We love our new sheepdogs. They're like sheepdog puppies that want to run 100 miles an hour, and they want to go out and chase bad guys and all of that. They do a lot of proactive arrests. In fact, I don't know how many know this number, but in law enforcement, 29,000 arrests per day in the United States, which is a number to really take a look at. remember that that's physical arrest, so that would be 29,000 contacts right there. Now, I'm not saying we go to a position where we don't arrest anybody, and I'm not even saying that we don't hold people responsible, because there are ways to deal with arrestable offenses. Some is to get a warrant and deal with it after the fact, after this thing passes. The other possibility is when you're in a situation where normally you might make a custodial arrest, you can cite and release. So there's things of that nature too that can be done. But we've got to tell our folks that we certainly understand the concept of the sheepdog guarding the sheep, if you will. But the idea is if the sheepdog's unavailable because they're quarantined or they're ill, then that leaves a real problem in the making. So what we want to do is we want to limit contacts on this front end so that we have a lot of healthy sheepdogs running around when necessary, and in those cases where we have no choice, because there are going to be calls for service where people are being hurt, people are being killed, rapes taking place, things of that nature, the serious offenses where somebody's endangered, serious assaults, and domestic assaults of any type, where law enforcement is going to have to respond. We will, in a different session, talk about the things that officers should do when responding to these calls to protect themselves. But again, proactive law enforcement, particularly even a lot of the traffic enforcement, is something that we should probably really ask ourselves, is this a time where we should be doing any kind of proactive work? As I said, hurricanes, and I'm just using that as one example. A lot of our officers are put in what they call fixed positions. They're not out stopping cars. They're not out chasing bad guys. So what they are is they're responding only to things that require an immediate response, because we want to keep them safe. We don't want something to happen to them. In hurricane cases, we're worried about tidal flooding and officers drowning. We're worried about trees coming down on top of officers and their vehicles, and any kind of thing like that. In this case, remember what we're worried about. We're worried about something that we can't even see. We're worried about a virus that is passed through human contact, so that we want to make sure that we limit proximity to people unless it's absolutely necessary, so that our officers can remain healthy and be there for those cases that are the most serious. Not a lot different than what's going on in the health profession, in wanting to make sure that there's not just enough beds for people that get this virus, but to make sure there's enough beds for the people that get sick on a regular basis, the people that get ill on a regular basis, the people that are injured on a regular basis. So again, we don't want to overwhelm the healthcare profession with patients. The same thing. We don't want to overwhelm law enforcement in a situation where so many officers are quarantined or sick that they can't possibly function when we have the very serious cases that come in on a regular basis. You know it, I know it. We deal with those on a regular basis, and those still have to be dealt with because that's what our mission is and what we do. So we want to be there for public safety. So again, step one, limit calls for service. We do that by taking a lot of things over the phone that we would have otherwise responded to because the incident's over with. There's no need to go out and collect evidence. It's not that serious an offense. Nobody is hurt where we need any kind of immediate response. And so, a lot of calls taken over the phone, and individual departments will have to decide what those calls for service will be. But that's certainly something that should be considered. Again, and I get it, we love our proactive officers, but this is a time when we've got to limit that proactive response so that we maintain the health of our officers. So discretionary arrests are something that we should also consider as slowing things down. Now, one of the things is remember what the overall impact is if law enforcement is out there making arrests. One, the officer's having contact with the person, so that's a potential exposure. The officer's bringing the person to a jail, so everybody at the jail is a potential exposure. The person is being put into the jail population, so that's an exposure. I will tell you that there's jails all over the country that are letting people out to lessen exposure, and there's a lot of jails that aren't accepting prisoners until they're cleared for a period of time. So, I got a call last week also, the end of last week, from a sheriff in North Carolina. His officers had apprehended a wanted subject from another county. When they call the other county to say, hey, come get your prisoner, the other county said, we don't want him. We're not accepting anybody in the jail on these minor cases, and it was a minor warrant. And so the sheriff in the county that carried the warrant just refused to take the prisoner. And the sheriff I was talking to was like, what do I do now? Well, I think you got to treat it just like you do a non-extraditable prisoner. A non-extraditable warrant, and that's what you deal with it. But I think it is important for officers to know that there is a domino effect, maybe exponentially, on every arrest that you make because of the number of people that will be exposed to that individual. So again, and then by the way, getting somebody into court, having to do that transportation, having to do even, get them out of a cell to do the electronic or video arraignments, things of that nature. They're all exposures, and certainly something that if we can limit them in the short term, then we will be better off in the long term. So again, that's the idea. And the idea is, obviously, at the end of the day, is to keep our officers from avoidable exposures, right? And many of these things are avoidable exposures because it's all proactive. So we really should be going to a reactive model at this point until such time as we get to a point where it's safer to do so. So again, in this first session, we're really talking about moving into a reactive approach, kind of like in our weather emergencies, taking a fixed position, responding only to those calls that are necessary. Same thing with arrest, avoiding discretionary arrests, because particularly things that are of a minor nature. Certainly every traffic stop. Traffic stops should be limited to only those cases where the vehicle is posing a threat to other people on the roadway. That should be the limitation, because the bottom line is that every time you take somebody's license, every time you take somebody's registration, things of that nature, then obviously you're potentially exposed if that person happens to be sick. And everything we're reading, everything they're telling us is there's a lot of people out there that are carrying this virus that are what they call asymptomatic. In other words, they're not showing any symptoms. So you're not going to know, they're not even going to know that they are carrying the virus and could potentially pass it to an officer, which obviously is problematic. To the extent that you do have to respond, remember that they're telling us the safe distance is somewhere from 6 to 8 feet, and so most of our contacts, if we have to interview witnesses or things of that nature, we should maintain that safe space. We should be wearing latex gloves. I'm going to do a second section on kind of the things we can do from a disinfecting or avoiding exposure issue, but I think we got to remember to maintain that space. Everybody's calling it social distancing. In our case, it's occupational distancing, because there are going to be cases where we are going to have to be near people. We are going to have to be close to people and deal with people. So we want to do some occupational distancing when we do that. The other thing is, in the event that we have to make arrests, one of the things, and I'm going to recommend this again when we talk about some of the other cleanliness issues and hygiene issues during this emergency in a separate session, we should be using flex cuffs when we make an arrest, and the reason is because it's one and done. We can cut them and dispose of them. So to the extent that you have those available, otherwise, it is difficult. We certainly disinfect our handcuffs. I get that, but just remember that there's a lot of nooks and crannies on handcuffs, and the one and done with the disposable flex cuffs seems to be a much more sound approach in the environment we're working in right now. So again, these are some of the things that agencies are talking about. These are some of the things that agencies are doing. So again, just in summary, We want to limit stops. We want to limit contacts. So that's first and foremost. The more we limit, the better off we are. We want to consider doing some of our reporting by telephone. So something else that we should seriously consider. We want to limit discretionary arrests along with stops because we don't want those folks in the jail as well. And again, I understand that some of this is hard for my new sheepdogs particularly, but we got to remember that right now is not the time to be the puppy that's running around. Now is the time to be a little slower, a little more laid back, and that way you're available when the most serious events happen, so that we don't end up having issues in the long run with officers quarantined. Some of you may have read there's a lot of officers quarantined in the NYPD. Even my own agency, we had some officers that made an arrest a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and I think there were 10 officers involved in this foot chase and arrest, and all 10 were at least quarantined in the short term till it was determined if the subject actually had the virus. So again, we want to make sure that you're available when the serious things come in. We can't have a situation where we don't have enough officers to take care of public safety in those instances where there's ongoing events that pose a threat to the public or to individuals. So that's the whole idea behind these limitations. Hey, thanks for joining us. As we get more information in from agencies around the country, I am going to try to share that through these briefings, if you will. I'm going to try to keep them short. That's why I'm not covering some of the other points that we have in this particular session. But do your best to be safe, maintain distances, wash your hands, and do all the things that are being recommended by the Center for Disease Control. Have a great day, and please be safe.